He called me a worker bee inside the house I built with my own bleeding hands. My wife didn't defend me. She toasted to my financial execution with my own blue label scotch. They thought I was just a boring, predictable checkbook. They forgot that the man who designs the foundation knows exactly where to plant the explosives. If you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know there are still loyal people out there. They wanted to steal my life, but they were about to learn that structural failure happens fast. The flight from Chicago didn't just descend. It fell out of the sky like a stone dropped down a well. 1,000 feet of altitude vanished in the span of 2 heartbeats. Gravity, usually a constant, became a variable. My coffee cup defied physics for a split second, hovering in the air before splashing hot, dark liquid across the beige plastic of my tray table. In row 4, a baby began to scream, a high-pitched, primal siren that cut through the low hum of the engines. The cabin air grew heavy with the sudden, sharp scent of adrenaline and spilled dark roast. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tight and strained, stripping away the illusion of control. "Just a little rough air, folks. We'll be on the ground shortly." I didn't panic. I gripped the armrests, my knuckles bleaching white against the cheap fabric, but my mind remained cold. I am a structural engineer. I understand forces. I know that an airplane wing is designed with a tolerance for flexibility that the human mind finds unnatural. I know that steel has a yield point, that rivets have shear strength, and that turbulence is simply an equation, wind velocity versus aerodynamic resistance. I wasn't afraid of dying. If the structure failed, it failed. The math would win. I was afraid of not getting home. It was December 23rd. I was defying the schedule. I was coming home 24 hours early. I closed my eyes, blocking out the terrified passengers, and constructed an image of Susan in the dark behind my eyelids. I built her face from memory the way I built bridges, carefully, piece by piece. The arch of her brow, the tensile strength of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. She was the anchor, the foundation. I pictured the moment I would walk through the front door. I imagined the snow melting on the shoulders of my wool coat, the silence of the house breaking as I called her name. I imagined her shock, transitioning instantly into joy. I had a surprise in my pocket, a weight that felt heavier than its mass. I thought I was flying towards safety. I thought I was escaping the chaos of the storm systems over the Midwest. I was wrong. The turbulence at 30,000 feet was nothing compared to the catastrophic structural failure waiting for me on the ground. The landing gear slammed onto the tarmac with a violence that rattled my teeth. The plane skidded, corrected, and finally groaned to a halt. I didn't wait. I was out of my seat before the chime signaled safety, grabbing my leather bag from the overhead bin with a desperation that drew a glare from the flight attendant. I needed to move. I needed to close the distance. The terminal was an assault on the senses, a chaotic sea of red and green sweaters, a cacophony of reunions, families colliding in tearful embraces, children sprinting with the reckless energy of the holidays. The air was thick with the cloying scent of cinnamon pretzels, damp wool, and floor wax. I moved through them like a ghost, disconnected from their joy. I was a man on a mission. I dodged a janitor pushing a mop bucket and sidestepped a businessman sprinting for a connection. I found my truck in the long-term lot, Section C. It was a white mound, an unrecognizable shape buried under 6 inches of hard-packed ice and snow. It looked like a derelict relic from an ice age. I couldn't find the scraper. I cursed, my breath blooming in white clouds before me. I spent 20 minutes hacking at the windshield with a platinum credit card. The wind here wasn't just moving air. It was a physical presence, a knife that cut through my expensive wool coat and bit into the skin. My fingers went numb, turning clumsy and stiff, but I didn't stop. I paused only once to pat the breast pocket of my jacket. The box was there, a diamond anniversary band. Platinum setting, it had cost me 3 months' salary. Calculated down to the decimal. It was precise. It was perfect. It was the structural reinforcement my marriage didn't need, but one I wanted to install anyway. I turned the key. The engine coughed, protested, and then rattled to life. The heater blasted air that was colder than the outside for the first mile. I drove out of the lot, merging onto the highway. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets now, erasing the horizon. It muted the world, turning the highway into a white tunnel of swirling flakes and taillights. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, vibrating against the leather. The screen lit up the dark cab. Patrick Vane. My business partner. My best friend. the brother biology had neglected to give me. I stared at the name glowing in the dark. I smiled, a reflex of genuine affection. Patrick was likely calling to panic about the quarterly reports or to double-check the Sterling Group file. He handled the money, I handled the math. He was the face, I was the brain. It was a perfect system, a balanced load. He worried so I didn't have to. I reached for the phone, then stopped. If I answered, I'd have to explain why I wasn't in Chicago. I'd ruin the surprise. I let it go to voicemail. The buzzing stopped, leaving me alone with the rhythmic thump-thump of the wiper blades fighting the snow. We had built Cross and Vein Engineering from a damp basement startup into the most respected firm in the state. I trusted him with my life. I trusted him with my livelihood. I drove on, blind to the fact that the silence on the other end of that phone call was the sound of a guillotine blade being hoisted. I turned onto my street around 9:30 p.m. The cul-de-sac was silent, a snow globe suspended in time. My house sat at the end, a sprawling colonial that I had renovated with my own hands. I knew every joist, every beam, every conduit in that structure. I had laid the hardwood floors until my knees bled. I had hung the drywall. I had built the redwood deck where we drank wine in the summers. The windows were glowing with a warm amber light. Against the blue-black of the winter night, it looked like a painting. It looked like stability. It looked like the one thing an engineer covets above all else. Equilibrium. I pulled into the driveway but didn't go to the garage. I killed the headlights and the engine. Silence rushed back in, ringing in my ears. I wanted to sneak in. I wanted the reveal to be perfect. I wanted to see her face light up before she had time to compose herself. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The cold clamped down on me, instantly. The snow crunched loudly under my boots, crump, 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 a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. I reached the front porch and reached for my keys. My hand hovered over the brass lock. No. If I unlocked the door, the tumbler would click. The dog might bark, if we had one. We didn't, just the silence. She might hear me. I wouldn't ring the bell. I wouldn't unlock the door yet. I wanted to see her first. I wanted a glimpse of my life from the outside, a moment of voyeurism into my own happiness. Maybe she was wrapping gifts. Maybe she was humming a carol, swaying to music I couldn't hear. I stepped off the porch and waded through the drift toward the living room window. The curtains were drawn. Heavy velvet drapes I had paid a fortune for. But there was a gap, just a sliver of glass, a vertical crack of light, cutting through the darkness. I approached it slowly. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from exertion, but from anticipation. I leaned in. I put my face close to the freezing glass, my breath fogging the pain for a second before I wiped it away. I peered inside. The fireplace was roaring, casting dancing shadows against the crown molding I had installed last spring. The Christmas tree was a pyramid of light, casting a soft, bloody red glow over the walls. Susan was there. She was wearing the red silk dress. The one she had told me was too tight and too flashy for my company party last week. The one she had left in the closet. She wasn't wrapping gifts. She wasn't humming. She was standing by the mantel, holding a glass of my scotch, the blue label, the bottle I saved for milestones. And she wasn't alone. It was Kashet. My brain stuttered. The synapses fired, but the signal refused to connect. It was a data error, a glitch in the rendering of reality. He wasn't sitting in a guest chair. He wasn't standing politely by the drink cart. He was lying on the Persian rug the one Susan and I had owed in Istanbul on our honeymoon, sprawled out with the languid, predatory ease of a lion claiming a kill. His tie, a red Hermes silk I recognized because I had given it to him for his birthday, was loosened, the knot dragged down to his second button. His suit jacket, custom charcoal wool, was thrown carelessly over the back of my favorite armchair. The leather gathered under the weight of his garment, reshaping itself to him. He was laughing. I pressed my ear closer to the freezing glass, risking discovery for clarity. It wasn't his business laugh, that booming, percussive sound he used to disarm clients and dominate boardrooms. It wasn't the brotherly chuckle we shared over beers after a site inspection. This sound was soft, low, resonant. It was the sound of a secret shared in the dark. It was intimate. He reached up, his hand moving with a familiarity that made my stomach turn over, and touched Susan's hair. He wound a lock of her blonde curls around his finger. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his hand. She closed her eyes, and her face softened into an expression of relief. An expression of relief. An expression surrender. I froze. My boots were rooted in the snow, but I felt like I was falling. My mind, trained to analyze stress points and load paths, frantically tried to calculate the geometry of the scene. I looked for the logic. I looked for the innocent explanation. Maybe he was comforting her. Maybe there was a tragedy. Patrick, Susan, impossible. The equation didn't balance. The variables were wrong. Patrick was my partner. Susan was my wife. They were the two pillars holding up the roof of my life. If they were touching, the roof should be collapsing. Then Patrick spoke. The double-pane glass muffled his voice, turning it into a low hum, but the words cut through the silence of the yard like a diamond drill bit. Relax, babe. It's done. Susan opened her eyes. Even through the window, I could see the tremor in her hands as she lifted my scotch to her lips. She looked beautiful, and she looked terrified. Are you sure? She asked. Her voice was thin, brittle. What if he checks the accounts? What if he logs in before the 31st? Patrick smirked hot. It was a look I knew well, the arrogant, confident curve of the mouth that appeared whenever he closed a massive deal. I usually loved that look. It meant we had won. Now, I realized that look was a weapon, and I was the target. He won't, Patrick said, waving a hand dismissively. Nathan is a creature of habit. He's a worker bee. Susan, he looks at blueprints, not bank statements. He looks at load-bearing walls, not ledger lines. He trusts me. The word hit me with the physical force of a bullet. He trusts me. It wasn't just a statement of fact, it was an insult. He said it with pity. He said it like my loyalty was a defect, a structural weakness he had identified and exploited. I stood in the snow, paralyzed by a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Susan took a long sip of the scotch, draining half the glass. The liquid courage seemed to settle her. I just feel bad, she murmured. He worked so hard for this house. He built the deck with his own hands. He worked, Patrick agreed, sitting up and pouring himself more of my liquor. He worked, and now we get paid. That's how capitalism works, darling. He leaned forward, his face illuminated by the firelight, his gleaming with greed. The Sterling Group deal closes on the 31st, Patrick said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that I had to strain to hear. As soon as he signs the power of attorney tomorrow, thinking it's for the insurance audit, we wire the liquid cash to the Cayman account. The transfer is already queued. And the debt? Susan asked. The equipment loans? The line of credit stays with him, Patrick said, his voice smooth as oil. The shell company absorbs the liabilities. By the time the bankruptcy courts catch up to the paperwork, we'll be in Tuscany. Tuscany, the word echoed in my head. Tuscany. Susan and I had a jar in the bedroom, a ceramic jar where we put spare change and occasional bonuses. It was labeled the Villa. We had talked about it for 10 years, going to Tuscany for our 20th anniversary, drinking wine, eating olives, growing old under the Italian sun. Now they were going. They were taking my dream. They were taking my money. They were taking my future to pay for their sin. 2 more days, Susan whispered, looking at the fire. Then I'm free of him. He's so boring, so predictable. Always with the math, always with the safety checks. Suffocating, Patrick added, nodding sympathetically. You deserve to breathe, Susan. They leaned in. I watched my wife, the woman I had sworn to protect, the woman I had flown home early to surprise, lean forward and kiss my best friend. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was hungry. Possessive. It was a kiss that erased 18 years of marriage in 3 seconds. I watched them toast to my destruction with my own liquor. I stepped back. My body moved on instinct, a reflexive recoil from the heat of the window. My boot hit a hidden patch of ice beneath the snow. My center of gravity shifted. I flailed, my heavy coat throwing me off balance. I slammed into the brick exterior of the chimney. My hands scraped against the rough, freezing stone. The skin tore. I gasped, looking at my palm. Blood welled up, dark and thick in the moonlight, stark against the white cuff of my shirt. The pain was sharp, stingingly real. I stared at the blood. Good. The pain was good. The pain told me this wasn't a nightmare caused by altitude sickness. This wasn't a hallucination. This was structural failure. The load had exceeded the capacity. The bridge was collapsing, and I was standing in the middle of the span. I needed to scream. I needed to pick up a brick and hail it through the window, to shatter their warmth, to make them bleed like I was bleeding. But I didn't. I'm an engineer. You don't fix a crack by screaming at it. You don't stabilize a foundation by throwing stones. You measure. You assess. You gather data. I wiped the blood on my coat. I looked at the window again. I needed proof. I needed data. The structural integrity of my life had just failed, but the engineer in me refused to shut down. Panic is a luxury for people who don't understand how things are built. Panic causes you to miss the load path. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, which was currently freezing the blood on my palm into a dark, sticky resin, but from a rage so pure it felt like vibration. I had to dampen the oscillation. I had to stabilize. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were clumsy, numb blocks of ice. I almost dropped the device into the snow, which would have been the end of everything. I gripped it with both hands, forcing my thumbs to work. Passcode. Camera. Switch to video. I held the lens up to the crack in the drapes. The gap was no wider than a pencil, but it was enough. On the screen, the image was grainy, low-light digital noise, but the audio was clear. Foolproof, Patrick was saying, pouring corn drink. The amber liquid swirled in the glass. My glass. The paperwork is a labyrinth, Nate. By the time he navigates the shell companies, the assets will be liquidated. I watched the waveform on my screen spike with every word. He signs the transfer. Patrick continued, his voice dripping with condescension. And we dumped the toxic assets, the failed concrete patent, the pending litigation from the harbor project onto his personal liability insurance. He won't just be broke, Susan. He'll be uninsurable. He'll be fighting lawsuits for the rest of his life. It wasn't just theft. It was an execution. He wasn't just taking the money. He was planting a bomb in the foundation of my career to ensure I could never rebuild. Susan sighed, a soft, earthy sound. I love you, she said. The words were quiet, but the microphone picked them up. I love you too, Patrick replied. I stopped the recording. Save file. Upload to cloud. Pending, complete. My stomach twisted violently. A surge of bile rose in my throat, hot and acidic, clashing with the freezing air in my lungs. I gagged, swallowing it back down. I backed away, 1 step. 2 steps. Every instinct in my reptilian brain screamed at me to smash the window, to kick down the door, to storm into that warm, red-lit room and tear him apart. I was bigger than Patrick. I spent my days climbing scaffolding and hauling steel. He spent his days lifting fountain pens. I could sap him. But murder is a messy equation. Murder doesn't get your assets back. Murder doesn't undo the betrayal. It just completes the destruction they had started. I needed to leave. I needed to think. I needed to find a vantage point where I wasn't blinded by the red haze of rage. I turned and walked toward the truck. The white mound of my vehicle looked like a lifeboat in a dark ocean. I reached for the door handle, locked. I pulled again, harder. The mechanism held fast. I patted my pockets. Coat left, coat right, pants. Empty. My keys were gone. I froze. A fresh wave of adrenaline washed over me, sharper than the wind. I checked again, frantically slapping my chest, my hips. Nothing. I must have dropped them. When I stumbled, when I pulled out my phone, I dropped to my knees in the snow, frantic now. I swept my hands through the powder, my numb fingers raking against the gravel of the driveway. Where are they? I looked at the spot where I had fallen against the wall. There, a glint of metal in the moonlight. Half buried in a drift near the front tire. I lunged for them. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the fob. Click. The sound came from the house. The deadbolt. The front door opened. A rectangle of warm golden light spilled out onto the snow, stretching long and distorted across the driveway. It stopped inches from my boots. I dove. I didn't think. I moved. I rolled behind the bulk of my truck, pressing my back against the icy metal of the rear fender. The wheel well bit into my spine. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Did you hear something?" Patrick's voice drifted out into the night. He was standing on the porch. I could smell him, the faint drift of wood smoke from the open door and the underlying scent of my scotch. I squeezed my eyes shut. If he walked down the steps, if he looked around the truck, probably just the wind. Susan's voice called out from inside. She sounded bored, or a branch hitting the siding. "Come back inside. It's freezing." Patrick lingered. I heard the leather of his shoes scuff against the porch planks. He was scanning the darkness. He was looking for monsters. He didn't know the monster was already in the driveway. "Yeah," Patrick muttered. "Just the wind." The door closed. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thud. The light vanished, plunging me back into the blue-gray dark. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It plumed white in the air. I grabbed the keys from the snow. I gripped them so hard the metal bit into my palm. I looked at the truck. I could get in. I could start the engine. But the 6.7-liter diesel engine was loud. It would rumble. The headlights would flare, illuminating the living room window. If I started the truck, they would look out. They would see me. They would know I was here. And if they knew I was here, the element of surprise, the only leverage I had left, would be gone. Patrick would spin a story. He would claim I was drunk, paranoid. He would destroy the evidence before morning. I couldn't drive. I looked at the cab. Through the frosted window, I could see the dark shape of my heavy expedition parka on the passenger seat. I had taken it off during the drive because the heater was working too well. If I opened the door to get it, the dome light would turn on, a beacon in the darkness. I looked at my attire. I was wearing a suit jacket and a dress shirt, no hat, no glove, leather loafers that were already soaked through. Temperature, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill, -5. Risk of hypothermia high. Risk of detection, 100%. I made the calculation. I chose the cold. I needed a plan B. I crouched behind the truck, shielding my phone screen from the house. Battery, 8%. I opened the Uber app. If I walked to the main road, I could get a ride to a hotel. I could regroup. I switched to my banking app to check my balance. I needed to know what resources I had for the war to come. The screen loaded, the little circle spinning, mocking me. Then the text appeared. Access denied. Account frozen. Suspicious activity. Please contact branch. I stared at the screen. The white letters were brighter than the Nez. Patrick. Of course. He handled the admin. He had the passwords. He must have frozen my access to prep for the sale. Or maybe to keep me from seeing the draining of the accounts. He had locked me out of the money I had earned. The money that paid for the roof over his head right now. I tried the credit card app. Card canceled. I tried the joint saving. Access restricted. I was standing in the driveway of a house I had built with my own hands, looking at a truck I had paid for, wearing clothes I had bought. And I owned nothing. He had severed every load path. He had removed every support beam. I stood up, keeping the truck between me and the house. The wind howled, tearing through my thin suit jacket as if it were tissue paper. It bit into my skin, searching for the warmth of my core. I was a structural engineer. I solved problems, but as I stood there, shivering violently, I realized this wasn't an engineering problem. This was a demolition, and I was the rebel. I started walking. I turned my back on the colonial house with the warm yellow windows. I turned my back on the truck, buried in snow. I turned my back on 18 years of equity and 15 years of partnership. I walked toward the mouth of the cul-de-sac. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound that tore through the thin fabric of my suit jacket, as if it weren't there. It found the seams of my shirt. It found the gaps at my collar. Every step was a calculated effort. Lift, extend, plant, repeat. My dress shoes, Italian leather soles designed for boardroom carpets and restaurant tile slid uselessly on the packed ice. Within 50 yards, my socks were soaked. Within 100, my feet were blocks of wood attached to my ankles. The physical pain was blinding. It started as a sting, then a burn, then a deep, throbbing ache that settled in the marrow of my bones. But the physical pain was a mercy. It was a distraction. It kept the screaming in my head at bay. Worker bee. The words played on a loop, synchronized with my footsteps. Boring, step, predictable step, suffocating, step. I remembered the day I met Susan. We were 22. She was an art major. I was engineering. She called me her anchor. She said she loved that I was solid, that I was heavy. She said she needed gravity because she was always floating away. I had spent 2 decades being her gravity. I had held her down so she wouldn't drift off, and now, she and Patrick, my lighter-than-air partner, the balloon man, were floating away together. And they were laughing at the weight of me. I reached the main highway. It was a 4-lane scar, cutting through the suburbs, usually choked with traffic. Tonight, it was a desolate wasteland of gray slush and sodium vapor orange light. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long, lonely shadows that stretched out before me like prison bars. I checked my phone one last time. Battery 1%. I stared at the screen. I wanted to call someone. My daughter, Emma? No, she was at ski camp in Vermont. I couldn't ruin her Christmas. My mother? Dead. My lawyer? At a holiday party. The screen flickered. The Apple logo appeared briefly, ghostly white, and then vanished. Black. Now I was truly alone. No connection to the grid. No access to the world. Just a biological organism moving through a hostile environment. I saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching, moving fast. I waved my arms. I stepped toward the shader, the slush spraying up my legs. Help! I shouted. The wind tore the word from my mouth instantly. The car didn't slow down. It was an SUV, laden with gifts in the back window. The driver swerved slightly to avoid me, the tires spraying me with a wave of freezing gray sludge. I stood there, dripping, watching the taillights fade into the white void. Structural integrity, I muttered to myself, my jaw stiff and clumsy. Check the foundation, find the load path. I was talking to myself to stay awake. I knew the signs of hypothermia, confusion, lethargy. If I stopped moving, the internal furnace would shut down. I reached the city limits after what felt like hours. The buildings grew taller here, creating a wind tunnel effect that channeled the blizzard directly into my face. I saw the train station ahead. It was a grand old building, a relic of the railway boom. Red brick, limestone columns, a slate roof. It looked like a castle, a fortress, shelter. If I could make it there, I could sit inside. I could find a radiator. I could wait until morning. I ran the last block. My legs were heavy, unresponsive, but the promise of warmth drove me forward. I scrambled up the granite steps, slipping once, skinning my knee through my suit pants. I didn't feel it. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the main double doors. I pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled again, putting my entire body weight into it. Locked. I pressed my face to the glass. Inside, the grand waiting hall was dark, save for the emergency exit signs casting a green sickly glow over the marble floors. I looked at the sign taped to the glass, closed for holiday. Rue opens Dakikov at 6 a.m. No! No! I screamed. I slammed my fist against the wood. Open! Damn it, open up! My voice echoed in the empty plaza, bouncing off the stone walls and fading into the wind. There was no answer. The station stood silent, a monument to indifference. I slid down the rough brick wall. I couldn't stand anymore. My legs gave out, not from fatigue, but from a total lack of sensation. I sat on the concrete bench tucked under the overhang of the roof. It offered a few feet of protection from the falling snow, but the concrete sucked the remaining heat from my body instantly. I curled inward, tucking my hands into my armpits. I was going to die here. Nathan Cross, structural engineer, CEO, frozen to death on a bench on Christmas Eve, 5 miles from his $1 million home. The irony was structural perfection. Rough night? The voice was small, scratchy, like dry leaves blowing over pavement. I jerked my head to the left. I hadn't seen her. In the shadows of the overhang, tucked into the corner where the wind couldn't reach, was a shape, a pile of rags, old blankets, newspapers, plastic bags. The rags moved. A face appeared. It was a woman, an old woman. She was tiny, bird-like. Her skin was the color of wet ash. She was wearing a thin, moth-eaten cardigan and a summer skirt over thick, mismatched tights. She was shaking so violently that her teeth were clicking together, a rapid, rhythmic tack-tack-tack like dice in a cup. "Yeah," I said. My lips felt like rubber. "Rough night. I missed the bus," she stuttered, her eyes wide and unfocused. "My son, he's coming," he said. "He's coming. But phone died." She held up a cracked ancient smartphone. "Dead. Just like mine." She looked at me. Her eyes were bright blue, startlingly clear in the gloom. They were sharp, intelligent. They didn't look like the eyes of someone who belonged on a bench. "You have nice shoes," she said, nodding at my ruined loafers. I looked at them. The leather was stained with salt, cracked from the cold. "They used to be," I said. She shivered her dearest. A violent spasm went through her small frame, convulsing her shoulders. She let out a small whimper. I looked at her. She was in the late stages. Her shaking was slowing down, which was bad. It meant her body was giving up the fight. She reminded me of my mother, not in looks, but in her fragility, the way she held her hands. I looked at the glass doors of the station. I saw my reflection. A big man, 6'2", broad shoulders. Even shivering, I had mass. I had body heat generated by 200 pounds of muscle and bone. She had nothing. She was a twig in a hurricane. I stood up. My knees popped loudly in the cold air. I made a decision. It wasn't logical. It wasn't self-preservation. It was the engineer in me recognizing a structural failure in progress and moving to shore it up. I took off my suit jacket. The cold hit me instantly. It felt like being punched in the chest by a block of ice. The wind slashed through my thin cotton dress shirt, biting directly into my skin. I gasped, the air turning to needles in my lungs. "Here," I stepped toward her and draped the jacket over her shoulders. It was heavy wool, lined with silk. It was warm for my body. "No," she whispered, her eyes widening. You'll freeze." "I'm hot," I lied. My teeth chattered, betraying me. "I just walked 3 miles. I'm sweating. Take it." I tucked the jacket around her. She was so small she practically disappeared inside it. I pulled the lapels tight under her chin. "Thank you," she gasped. The shivering subsided slightly as the residual heat from my body trapped itself around her. You are a good man." "I'm a fool," I said, sitting back down, hugging my shirt sleeves. "But I'm a warm fool, or I was." "Come on," I said, sliding closer to her on the bench. "We have to move. Body heat, thermodynamics." I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her fragile frame against my side. I became the wall. She became the shelter. "I'm Nathan," I said. "Martha," she chattered. "Nice to meet you, Martha." "What's your son's name?" "Edward," she said. Her voice was getting stronger, warmer. "He's a good boy. He works too much. Always working." "I know the type," I said.
"I used to be one."
We sat there for an hour. The wind howled around our little shelter to keep us awake, to keep the synapses firing. I told her about bridges. I told her about the Golden Gate. I told her about suspension cables and compression forces. I told her about the stress tests we ran on concrete. She listened. She asked smart questions. "If the foundation is cracked," she asked, looking up at me from the depths of my coat, "can you save the building?" I looked at the falling snow. "Sometimes," I said. "You can inject epoxy. You can underpin it with steel. But sometimes the rot is too deep," I said. "Sometimes you have to tear it down and start over." "Which one is this?" she asked, looking at my face. "I think I'm in the demolition phase," I said. My vision was getting blurry at the edges. A gray tunnel was closing in. The cold was no longer painful. It was becoming a dull, heavy sleepiness. I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't feel my hands. "He's coming," Martha said suddenly. "Who?" I mumbled. My tongue felt thick. "Edward." I forced my eyes open. A light was cutting through the darkness. The light didn't just illuminate the snow. It severed the darkness. Twin beams of xenon blue cut through the blizzard, blindingly bright, casting long, stark shadows against the brick wall of the station. A low hum, deeper and more powerful than the wind, vibrated in my chest. A vehicle glided to the curb. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't a police cruiser. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, elongated, black as oil, looking less like a car and more like an extraterrestrial vessel that had touched down in the slush. The rear door flew open before the car even fully stopped. A man stepped out. The atmosphere changed instantly. The wind seemed to respect him. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. He wore no overcoat, yet he moved with a heated urgency that defied the freezing temperature. He scanned the bench. He saw the pile of rags. "Mother!" The scream tore from his throat, raw, terrified. He ran to us, his patent leather shoes crunching through the ice. He fell to his knees in the slush, ruining the tuxedo trousers, ignoring the wet and the cold. "Mother, are you all right?" "I tracked your phone. The signal died hours ago. The driver got lost in the detour." Martha shifted under my suit jacket. She smiled, a weak, trembling expression. She reached out a shaking hand and patted his frozen cheek. "I'm fine, Edward," she whispered. Her voice was thin but steady. "I'm warm. Nathan saved me." She pointed a gloved finger at me. Edward turned. His eyes were gray steel, intelligent, assessing, dangerous. He looked at me. He saw the snow in my hair. He saw my shirt sleeves, soaked and freezing. He saw his mother wrapped in my expensive, tailored wool jacket. He understood the thermodynamics of the situation in a second. I had transferred my heat to her. I had acted as the sacrificial anode to save the critical structure. He stood up. He extended a hand. "I am Edward Vance," he said. I blinked. My brain was sluggish, the synapses firing through a sludge of hypothermia. Vance. Vance Industries. Commercial real estate, tech, shipping, the skyline of the city was dominated by his name. He owned the steel I built with. Nathan Cross. I managed to say. I tried to stand, but my legs had turned to stone. My knees buckled. Edward caught me. His grip was iron. "Mr. Cross," he said, his voice dropping into a command tone. "Get in the car." I didn't argue. I didn't have the structural integrity left to resist. The interior of the limousine was a different world. It smelled of warm leather, expensive cologne, and safety. The air was climate-controlled to a perfect 72 degrees. The silence was absolute. The storm outside was reduced to a silent movie playing through the tinted glass. Edward poured a drink from a crystal decanter. Brandy, amber and rich. "Drink," he ordered. I drank. The liquid fire hit my stomach and exploded outward. The pain of the thaw was excruciating. My fingers and toes began to burn as the blood rushed in. I gritted my teeth to keep from groaning. Martha was wrapped in a cashmere blanket in the corner, sipping hot tea from a thermos. She looked small but safe. "You gave her your coat," Edward said. He wasn't asking. He was staring at me from the opposite seat, his tablet open on his lap. She was cold, I rasped. "You were cold, too." "I have more insulation," I joked weakly. "More structural mass." Edward didn't smile. He tapped the screen of his tablet. "Nathan Cross, CEO, Cross and Vane Engineering. Structural specialist, Caltech graduate. 2 patents pending." "You Googled me?" I asked, the brandy loosening my tongue. "I investigate everyone who comes within 10 feet of my mother," Edward said without looking up. "Why were you at the train station at midnight, in a blizzard, Mr. Cross? Why aren't you at home in that colonial on Oak Street with your wife?" I looked at the brandy glass. The amber liquid swirled, distorting the light. "I don't have a wife anymore," I said. "Not really. The dam broke. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe the alcohol, or maybe just the need to confess to someone who understood power." I told him. I told him about the flight, the turbulence, the walk through the snow. The window. The red dress, the scotch. The laughter. When I mentioned Sterling Group, Edward's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed into slits. "Stop," he said. He tapped the screen furiously. He scrolled, "Patrick Vane?" Edward asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, my partner." "He's been emailing my acquisition team for a month," Edward said. "He told us he had an exclusive offer for Vance Industries. He's trying to sell your firm to me." The plot thickened. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a complex fraud. Edward turned the tablet toward me. "Look at this." I focused my blurry eyes on the screen. It was a prospectus. A sales document for Cross and Vane. "This is fake," I said immediately. Pointing at the figures, "He lists the crossbeam patent as company property. It's not. It's in my name personally. And the liabilities, he lists them as 0.
And the reality.
We just took out a $2 million line of credit for new heavy machinery," I said. "If he sells the company without disclosing that debt, it's securities fraud," Edward finished. "He is trying to sell a hollow shell to me and simultaneously to Sterling. He intends to take the cash from both closings and vanish before we realize we bought a debt-ridden corpse." "He thinks I'm a worker bee," I said, the anger returning, heating me more than the brandy. "He thinks I'll sign the papers tomorrow without reading them, because I trust him." "Will you?" Martha asked from the corner. I looked at her. The frailty was gone. In the warmth of the car, she looked like a matriarch. A queen. "No," I said. "Good," Edwards. A dark, shark-like smile spread across his face. "Because I hate fraud. And I hate people who hurt the man who saved my mother." He opened a hidden drawer in the limo's console. He pulled out a black leather folder. "Nathan," Edward said, "I can lend you money. I can get you the best divorce lawyer in the state. We can crush him in court in 3 years." He paused. "Or," he said, "we can crush him tomorrow." What do you have in mind?" "Revenge," Edward said. "Structural collapse." He laid out the plan. It was precise. It was elegant. It was an engineering marvel of legal retribution. "You go back," Edward instructed. "You play the fool. You play the exhausted, jet-lagged husband. You act like the worker rake." "I can do that," I said. "I've been playing the fool for years, apparently." "Tomorrow, he will present the power of attorney. He needs your signature to authorize the sale of the assets." "Right. You will sign the papers," Edward said. I frowned. "If I sign, he wins." "Not his papers," Edward grinned. "My legal team is drafting a duplicate document right now. It looks identical. Same font, same letterhead, same weight of paper. But the content? Instead of transferring power to him," Edward said, "it activates a latent clause, transferring his 50% ownership to you in the event of proven criminal activity or breach of fiduciary duty, and it acknowledges the debt as his personal responsibility." "He'll read it," I argued. "He's careful." "He won't," Martha said softly. "Arrogant men never check the trap, Nathan. They only see the bait." The next morning, I stood in front of a mirror in a hotel suite Edward had arranged. I was shaved. I was wearing a new suit, charcoal gray, tailored perfectly. I looked tired. My eyes were rimmed with red. Perfect. I looked like a man who had slept in an airport lounge. I took a cab to my house. The ride was a blur. I walked up the driveway. My truck was still there, a white monument to the night before. I unlocked the front door. I had a spare key. Edward's locksmith had cut from a photo of my keychain taken the night before. I opened the door. The air inside smelled of pine needles and cinnamon. It smelled like a lie. "Susan," I called out, injecting a weary cheerfulness into my voice. "I'm home." Susan ran into the hallway. She was wearing a silk bathrobe. Her hair was messy. She looked pale. "Nathan," she squeaked. You're back." She threw her arms around me. I hugged her back. I smelled it. Beneath her expensive perfume, I smelled the musk of Patrick's cologne. It took every ounce of strength in my body not to shove her away. I had to be the wall. I had to bear the load. "Surprise," I said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Phone died. Charger broke. Slept at the airport lounge. Total nightmare." "Oh my God," she said, pulling back, her eyes searching my face. "We were so worried. Patrick called 5 times. I bet he did, I said. I missed you, she said. She twisted her wedding ring, the one that matched the band in my pocket. Later, I missed you too, I said. Patrick arrived 30 minutes later. He burst through the door, booming with fake energy, carrying a briefcase and a box of donuts. Nate, buddy, you scared the hell out of us. He slapped my back, hard. The physical contact made my skin crawl. Sorry, Pat, I said, rubbing my neck. Tech issues. You know how it is? Classic Nate, he laughed, shaking his head. Always with the bad luck with electronics. Hey, did you see your truck keys? You left them in the ignition. He held up my keys. The keys he had stolen. The keys he had locked inside the truck. Wow, I said, taking them. Must be losing my mind. Thanks, Pat. So, Patrick said, rubbing his hands together, his eyes darting to the briefcase. Big day. Christmas Eve. And paperwork, I said, dropping the... You mentioned the insurance audit in your voicemail? Right. Yes. Patrick snapped his fingers. Boring stuff. Bureaucracy. But we need to file before the end of the year to keep the premiums down. I have the forms. The doorbell rang. Who's that? I asked. Oh, Patrick said quickly. That's Marcus, the independent auditor. He just needs to witness the signatures. Formalities. You know how the insurance companies are? Marcus walked in. He was a small, sweaty man with shifty eyes and a cheap suit. I'd never seen him before. He was clearly a hired gun, someone Patrick had paid to rubber stamp the fraud. Mr. Cross, Marcus said, not meeting my eyes. Pleasure. Likewise, I said. This was a variable I hadn't expected. A witness. If I swapped the papers, Marcus might notice. I needed a distraction. I needed to separate them from the table. Coffee? Susan asked, playing the hostess. Please, Marcus said. I'll help, Patrick said instantly. He followed Susan to the kitchen. They needed a moment to whisper, to gloat, to confirm that the sheep had returned to the slaughter. I was alone with Marcus and the papers. Nice house, Marcus mumbled, looking on. Thanks, I said. I built it. Foundations are deep. I looked at the stack of papers on the dining room table. Power of attorney. I had the fake stack, Edward's stack, in my laptop bag under the table. Can I use the restroom? Marcus asked. He looked nervous. He knew what he was doing was illegal. Down the hall, I said. Second door on the left. He walked away. I had 10 seconds. I grabbed Patrick's stack of documents. I shoved them into my open bag. I pulled out Edward's stack. My hands were steady, cold, but steady. I placed them on the table. I aligned the edges. I squared them with the table edge. Perfect. Marcus came back. Patrick and Susan came back with coffee. Okay, Patrick grinned, setting down a mug. Let's sign this garbage so we can drink the good stuff tonight. He pushed a pen toward me. A Mont Blanc. Just sign the tabs, Nate. Standard legalese. I've already reviewed it. I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt significant. My hand hovered over the paper. You read this, Pat? I asked, looking him directly in the eye. Of course, he said without blinking, cover to cover. And the liability clause? Standard, he said. Protects us both equally. Another lie. Recorded by the tiny silver earpiece Edward had given me. I lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. I signed, Nathaniel Cross. Done, I said, capping the pen. Patrick snatched the papers before the ink was dry. He handed them to Marcus. File these immediately, Patrick ordered, his voice tight with triumph. Get them to the courier. Marcus nodded, stuffed the papers into his bag, and practically ran out the door. Great, Patrick clapped his hands. Now, get changed, buddy. Party starts at 7. It's going to be a night to remember. He thought he had won. He thought the building was his. He didn't know I had just detonated the charges. By 7:00 p.m., the house was full. It was a perfect replica of happiness. The Christmas tree was a towering pyramid of lights. The fireplace crackled with birch logs I had chopped myself, and the air was thick with the scent of pine, expensive perfume, and warm spices. Neighbors, clients, and friends filled the living room. They drank my wine. They ate the caterer's crab cakes. They admired the crown molding. I circulated through the room like a ghost haunting his own wake. I shook hands. I smiled. I accepted compliments on the company's record year. Susan was wearing the red silk dress again. She looked radiant, but it was a brittle radiance. She was clinging to Patrick's arm a little too tightly. Her laughter, a little too loud, a little too sharp. She was vibrating with the tension of the escape plan. Patrick was in his element. He was holding court by the piano, a scotch in one hand, gesturing broadly. He looked like a king. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching them. Load distribution, I thought. They think the structure is stable. They don't know the beams have been cut. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Sarah Jenkins, my old college friend, now a corporate litigator. I stepped into the powder room and locked the door. "Nathan," she said, her voice breathless. "I shouldn't be telling you this. It's privileged. But I just heard a rumor from a friend at the SEC." "What kind of rumor, Sarah?" "They're sniffing around Cross in vain. There's chatter about a massive debt dump. Nathan, if you signed anything today, if you put your name on those transfer documents, you need to run. They're coming for the officers of the company." "I'm not running, Sarah," I said, looking at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was cold, calm. "Nathan, listen to me." "I'm handling it," I said. "Just come to the party. You'll want to see this. Bring a business card. You might get a new client tonight." I hung up. The stakes had just escalated. It wasn't just money anymore, it was prison time. I walked back out. I scanned the room, looking for variables I hadn't accounted for. I saw a man in the far corner, near the patio doors. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't smiling. He was tall, wearing a black suit that fit poorly over a bulky frame. He had a scar running down his chin. "Mr. Klein, who is the heavy by the door?" I whispered, tapping the earpiece hidden in my ear canal. Edward's voice came back, clear and crisp. "That is Klein. He's the fixer for the Sterling Group. He's there to physically collect the contract or the cash. If Patrick doesn't deliver the company tonight, Klein breaks his legs. Or worse, Patrick was playing a dangerous game. He wasn't just selling me out. He was selling me out to sharks to pay off his gambling debts to wolves. I needed the final nail. The document swap was the trap. But I needed the confession to ensure the door stayed locked. I walked up to the bar. Patrick was pouring himself a heavy measure of Blue Label. His hand was shaking slightly, the only sign of the pressure he was under. "Hey, partner," I said, leaning against the mahogany counter. "Nate!" He jumped, spilling a drop. "Great party. Everyone is asking about the expansion plans." I lowered my voice. I made my shoulders slump. I played the part of the defeated, worried man. "I'm worried, Pat," I whispered. "About what?" "The deal is done. The audit," I said, looking around nervously. "The debt. We have that $2 million loan for the cranes. The failed concrete patent. If the buyer sees the books, if they see the red ink..." Patrick laughed. He leaned in close. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and rot. "Nate, look at me," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. "The buyer won't see it." "Why not?" "Due diligence." "'Cause I cooked the books, you idiot," Patrick hissed, a smile playing on his lips. I created a second set of ledgers. The debt isn't on the official record. It's hidden in the shell corporation. And the sale, by the time they find the debt, the sale is final. The money is in the Caymans. And we are ghosts. "And Susan," I asked, "is she okay with this risk?" "She came up with the Shell Corp idea," Patrick smirked. "She's smarter than she looks. She hates being poor, Nate, more than she loves being honest." I felt a coldness settle in my chest, absolute and final. "Got it?" Edward said in my ear. "Audio is clear. We have the confession. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Embezzlement. It's over." I looked at Patrick. I almost felt sorry for him. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, bragging about the view. My phone buzzed again, a text from Emma. "Dad, why is Mom's phone off?" I tried to FaceTime. I looked across the room. Susan was ignoring her phone, too busy laughing at a joke from the mayor's wife. She didn't want to talk to her daughter. She was too busy planning her escape from the life that created that daughter. That broke the last tether. Stealing my money was business. Ignoring our child was war. I walked to the center of the room. I picked up a silver spoon from the buffet table. I tapped my crystal glass. Clink, clink, clink. The sound cut through the chatter. The room went quiet. Faces turned toward me. Speech, someone shouted. Patrick beamed. He walked up next to me, draping his arm around my shoulder. The weight of it was heavy, suffocating. Yes, a speech, Patrick yelled, and an announcement. He looked at me, his eyes urging me to stick to the script. To announce my retirement. I looked at the crowd. I saw Sarah the lawyer looking nervous. I saw Klein the fixer looking bored. I saw Susan looking impatient. I want to propose a toast, I said, my voice steady. To loyalty. The crowd murmured politely. To loyalty. And to truth, I added. Patrick stiffened. His fingers dug into my shoulder. Patrick and I built this company from nothing, I continued. We built it on trust. But as engineers know, even the strongest foundation can crack if the load is unbalanced. Wrap it up, Nate, Patrick hissed in my ear. Actually, I said, raising my voice so it carried to the back of the room. Patrick has some news. He's leaving the firm. Patrick froze. What? He's decided to pursue other opportunities, I said, looking him in the eye. In the federal penal system. The room went deadly silent. You could hear the fire crackling. What the hell are you doing? Patrick whispered, his face draining of color. I know, Patrick, I said calmly. I know about Sterling. I know about the debt dump. I know about the Shell Corp. And I know about the Canaans. Patrick's face went white, then red. Panic flooded his eyes. You're drunk, he laughed, a high, desperate sound. Folks, Nathan is drunk. Too much holiday cheer. Am I? I pointed to the front door. Sarah, open it. The heavy oak door swung open. Edward Vance walked in. He was flanked by two men in blue windbreakers, with yellow letters on the back. FBI. The crowd gasped. The air was sucked out of the room. Patrick Edward's voice boomed, authoritative and deep. Who are you? Patrick stammered, stepping back. I'm the man you tried to defraud, Edward said, and the new majority owner of Cross and Bain. This is ridiculous. Patrick shouted, looking for an exit. Nathan signed the papers. He authorized everything. It's his signature. Did he? Edward held up his phone. He pressed play. Patrick's voice blasted over the Bluetooth speaker's system. I had installed myself. I cooked the books, you idiot. The debt is hidden. Susan came up with a Shell Corp idea. Susan screamed. It was a short, sharp sound. She dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor. The floor I had laid. The red wine spread like blood. Mr. Klein, the fixer, saw the FBI agents. He turned and slipped out the patio door into the snow. The agents let him go. They were here for the big fish. Patrick looked at me. His eyes were wild, animalistic. The mask of civility had completely dissolved. You wiretapped me, he screamed. You rat. After everything I did for you. He lunged. He swung a fist at my face. A clumsy, desperate haymaker. I didn't flinch. I spent 20 years hauling steel beams. I spent my life calculating impact forces. Patrick spent his time at country clubs holding a putter. I caught his fist in my left hand. The shock of the impact traveled up my arm, but I didn't move. I squeezed. I felt the delicate metacarpals in his hand grind together. I'm not a worker bee, Patrick, I said calmly. I'm the guy who builds the walls you hide behind. I twisted his arm. He cried out, dropping to his knees. Ugh, let go. The FBI agents moved in. Patrick Vane, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They cuffed him. They dragged him out. He was weeping, not tears of remorse, but tears of a narcissist who couldn't believe the mirror had broken. The party was over. The guests fled like rats from a sinking ship, leaving coats and purses behind in their haste to avoid being associated with the crime. Only Susan was left. She was sitting on the beige sofa, sobbing into her hands. I stood by the fireplace. Edward stood by the door, silent, giving us space. Nathan, Susan cried, looking up. Her mascara ran down her face in black streaks. Please. I was scared. He forced me. He said he would ruin us if I didn't help him. I looked at her. He forced you to sleep with him, I asked. He forced you to call me boring? To laugh at me while you drank my scotch? I didn't mean it, she begged, standing up and reaching for me. I love you. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. No, I said. You loved the house. You loved the money. You loved the stability I provided. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the velvet box. Susan's eyes lit up, a spark of hope. She thought I was going to forgive her. She thought she could charm her way out of the wreckage, just like she always had. Is that, she whispered. I opened the box. The diamond anniversary band sparkled fiercely in the firelight. I bought this for our 20th anniversary. I said, it cost 3 months of my life. It's beautiful, she said, reaching out her hand. I snapped the box shut. The sound was like a gunshot. It's liquid assets, I said. I placed the box on the mantelpiece. You're going to need a lawyer, Susan. Patrick will turn on you to cut a deal. He'll blame you for the shell company. You're going to need money. Nathan, don't leave me. Not here. Not with this. I'm not leaving you, I said, turning away. You left me years ago. You just forgot to walk out the door. I turned to Edward. I'm ready, I said. I walked out into the snow. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the life I had built. I walked toward the waiting limo, and for the first time in days I felt warm. I was in my new office. It was on the top floor of the Vance Tower, floor-to-ceiling glass. Steel, modern. Edward had acquired Cross and Vane, legally. He cleared the toxic debt. He kept the staff, the innocent ones. He named me CEO of the new division, Vance Structural. The door opened. It wasn't a client. It was Martha. She looked healthy. Her cheeks were pink. She was wearing a beautiful fur coat and carrying a garment bag. Mr. Cross, she smiled. Martha, I stood up. Please call me Nathan. She unzipped the bag. It was my heavy parka, the one I had left in the truck. Cleaned, pressed, smelling of lavender. I wanted to return this, she said. Keep it, I said. It looks better on you. No, she said, placing it gently on my desk. You might need it. The world can be cold, Nathan, even in a high tower. I touched the fabric. My son tells me Susan has moved in with her mother, Martha said softly. She sold the furniture to pay her legal retainers, and Patrick, bail was denied. He is awaiting trial. Justice, I said. And you, she asked. How is your foundation? I looked out the window. The city was bright below me. The snow had melted, revealing the gray concrete and the green shoots of spring. The foundation was rotten, I said, so I tore it down, and now, I smiled. I start digging. I left the office late that night. The parking garage was a cavern of concrete shadows. My footsteps echoed, clack, clack, clack. I reached my new truck. Hello, Nathan? The voice was rough, desperate, broken. I turned around. It was Patrick. He was out on bail, somehow. But he didn't look like Patrick. He looked like a specter. Unshaven, thin, shaking. He wasn't wearing a custom suit. He was wearing a dirty gray hoodie. Patrick, I said. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I pushed it down. You ruined me, Patrick said. His eyes were wild, darting around the shadows. You ruined yourself, I said. I just turned on the lights. I lost everything, he shouted, his voice cracking. My house, my car, my reputation. I'm sleeping in a shelter, Nathan. He stepped closer. I saw the glint of steel in his hand. A knife. A cheap, serrated kitchen knife. Give me your wallet, Patrick said, and the keys. I need a car. Don't do this, Patrick, I said, my voice calm. This is armed robbery. You're already facing 15 years. This makes it 20. I'm already dead, he screamed. He lunged. It was pathetic. He was slow, drunk, and weak. I stepped to the side. I grabbed his wrist, the same one I had twisted at the party. I pushed him back against the truck. The knife clattered to the concrete. Patrick slid down the door panel. He curled into a ball. He started to cry. Ugly, heaving sobs. I'm sorry, he sobbed into his knees. I'm so sorry, Nate. I don't know what happened. I just wanted more. I looked down at him, my best friend, my enemy, the man I had trusted with my life. I picked up the knife. I walked to the storm drain and dropped it in. I took out my wallet. I pulled out $500. Take it, I said. Nate, he looked up, confused. Take it. Get a meal. Get a bus ticket. Go somewhere. They don't know your name. He took the money. His hands were shaking. Why? He asked. After what I did. Because I'm not you, I said. I got in my truck. I drove away. I watched him in the rearview mirror, a small, diminishing figure in the vast, empty garage. I drove to the diner, the same diner where I had taken Martha after the limo ride. I sat in the same booth. The waitress poured me a coffee. Rough night? She asked. No, I smiled. Good night. My phone buzzed. It was Emma. Mom called me again. She wants to explain. She says it was all Patrick's fault. I stared at the text. There's nothing to explain, I typed back. But you can talk to her if you want. She's your mother, but she's not my wife. I drank my coffee. The door opened. A woman walked in. Sharp suit. Briefcase. Mr. Cross? Yes, I'm Rachel, she said. I'm with Vance Legal. Edward sent me. At midnight? Edward never sleeps, she smiled. He wanted you to see this immediately. She slid a file across the Formica table. I opened it. It was a deed. Property, 104 Oak Street. My house. The bank foreclosed on it yesterday. Rachel said. Edward bought the note this morning. He wants to know if you want it back. He can transfer the deed to you for $1. I looked at the photo of the house, the porch I built, the windows I installed, the living room where I had stood in the snow and watched my life burn. I remembered the warmth. I remembered the red light. I remembered the betrayal. No, I said. Rachel looked surprised. No, it's fully renovated. It's home. It's not a home, I said, closing the file. It's just a building. It's a structure with a compromised foundation. Sell it. What will you do? Rachel asked. I'll build a new one, I said. Somewhere else? Somewhere warmer, I said. Somewhere with no snow. Rachel smiled. She took the file back. Edward said you'd say that. She stood up. He also said to tell you, the coat looked good on you, but you don't need the armor anymore. She left. I finished my coffee. I walked out of the diner. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear, a vast dome of indigo velvet. I looked up at the stars. Orion was overhead. The hunter. I had lost the life I thought I wanted. The safe life. The predictable life. But I had found something else. I had found my yield point, and I hadn't broken. I got in my truck. I started the engine. The radio played a soft jazz tune. I drove past the train station. The bench was empty. No ghosts tonight. Just me. I pulled onto the highway, heading south. The road was open. The load was light. I was Nathan Cross. I was a builder. And tomorrow, I would start digging the new foundation. Thanks for being with us till the final moment. Considering Nathan and Patrick, should the ending have been different? Or was it perfect as it was?